So, good evening, everyone. Um, I'm Karan from Green Essentials, and I have Yogita also here with me. We'll be sort of moderating and guiding the session, which, of course, will be conducted by Poonam and Amar from Daily Dump. Um, I'd like to start by thanking Amog, Zainab, and our friends at HasGeek who've helped us set up this session. And we look forward to interesting stuff today from Poonam and the Daily Dump team. Today's session is, a continuation of what we started talking about last week, which is how it is that as citizens we can participate in the process of handling urban waste. So, for anybody who's living in a city today or even a town in India, urban waste is an obvious problem. You don't even have to open your eyes, you can pretty much smell it. I had a friend who used to kid that when we would take a flight from Goa to Bombay and maybe were about 20 miles out, he could smell it in a pressurized cabin in an aeroplane. uh, while that may be pushing it a little far, I think all of us sort of come face to face with the unpleasantness of our own waste as soon as we step out of our doors nowadays. So the question is, how can we really influence this as citizens? Because we waited for years and years and years, and obviously governments, both local governments and governments, the national government, haven't been able to influence change except in select pockets. So that's really what these conversations have been about. In terms of the this session itself, it's different from the first in the sense that while we talked about individual household composting there, we're going to talk about community composting now. And when we say community composting, we mean waste management at a larger scale. Uh, we mean that it could be an apartment complex, which is where most of us reside now, especially if we are in urban environments. It could be perhaps a collective, like, for instance, an office complex that wants to handle its waste. So, again, generating large volumes of waste and struggling with dealing with it. Of course, a huge part of this is actually just composting, because as Poonam mentioned in the session last week, 60% approximately of the waste that we produce in India is still organic waste, which can be composted. And by eliminating that, we, reduce the problem to the waste management problem to a much more manageable level. So, uh, before I pass on to Poonam and introduce Poonam and everybody else involved, I just request Amok to put on a poll, which we would like to see responses to. These are questions that we have in order to just better understand your challenges and what you find sort of difficult to deal with when you're managing community waste. What are the concerns that you have? This is what we want to know first. What is it that scares you most about community composting? Is it the bad smell? Is it bugs and other insects that may arise as a result of composting? Or do you feel there are other health impacts? Um, if we can just vote over the next 30 seconds or so. Okay. Amog, I believe we have a second poll that perhaps we could run. So it would be great to know whether you are considering starting community composting or whether you're already doing this in some way, in some form. Okay, so what I'm going to do is now kick off the session. Um, as I said, the session will be conducted by Poonam and Amar, and basically, they through Daily Dump have been talking about composting for many years now. I think a decade and a half almost. They've been extremely influential, I feel, in changing perspectives of people about waste, and I believe that in many ways they've shown a way in which we can individually and collectively sort of handle this or contribute to the handling of this waste problem, which I feel is extremely important to make us feel empowered, right? So in the last session we talked a lot about individual household things you can do to compost whatever half a kilo or a little more of waste that you may be producing in a day. In this session, we will talk about how you can compost at a much larger scale when you're talking about 40, 50 apartments, for example. And the problems become different. They become different not only in terms of the scale of the composting, but also in terms of the management of people and their feelings about composting. So I'd like to introduce Poonam and Amar, who is in particular what Poonam calls the Aga man, the person who will talk a lot in this session about how a community composting system can work. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. And thanks so much, Amog and Zainab, for all the help putting this together.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session. We're very excited that you guys are all here. Thank you, Karan and Yogita from Green Essentials. Karan and Yogita are one of our oldest partners and our friends, and we've journeyed this whole 15 years together. So thank you, both of you. And thank you, HasGeek, for being our tech partner and helping us do all of this because we are not tech savvy at all. I have today with me my team, which is Amar. Amar is, like Karan says, the Aga man of India. He calls himself the Aga man of India. And the joke that we have in our office is that if any community wants to compost, Amar is waiting to get them started. And there's Vedika from Daily Dump, who's going to be recording, helping everybody on YouTube with the responses, and Usha, who will be responding to all your chat questions. So welcome again. And I'm going to hand over, like Karan says, community composting is a completely different animal from home composting. It is actually completely different. While the composting process is the same, the dynamics are so different. And all of us will know that if we are living in a flat, even with 10 people, each one has a different opinion, and getting everybody on board to take a decision to agree on something like this is one of the hardest things. So over to you, Amar, and please do lead the session, and we'll all be here waiting to hear about how we can all get started in urban India, because like Karan says again, urban India is where all the flats and communities are going to become denser and denser, and we need solutions for those.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here, and again, it's good to hear that Aga Man of India is speaking to you guys now about community composting. You guys are lucky, and I'm just gonna share my screen now. I hope I'm audible to everybody, Karan.
Absolutely. Now I'm sitting back and relaxing. You're extremely audible to me.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so when we say community level composting, like Poonam mentioned, and I think you guys have already had another session on home composting, things become a little different because what we're talking about then is one big community to come to a consensus that the waste that has been traditionally going out of it for so long and being taken to somewhere where they did not know and they had been spending some amount of money doing it, to completely change that system. And now all of that waste will be actually lying inside the community, so to speak, and getting composted at one central spot, be it in the driveway around the community or on the terrace or in the garden. So that sometimes we see is a big step for some communities, and coming to that consensus and actually deciding on composting at site has been is kind of like a challenge and a time-consuming process when it comes to communities. And that's what we've been working with. And we are so lucky to have actually so many apartment complexes and societies across India and different cities who are actually already composting. And what this presentation will tell you is what are the various things that are necessary to be in place for a community to start composting successfully. And then after this, we can move on to talk about a particular product, just to give an example of what a successful composting, community composting product looks like and how it works. So when we speak of community level composting in Dairy Dam, the first thing we do is we divide your community into sizes, because the context or the of a small 25 home apartment in Bangalore would be different from a 100 home society in Delhi. And then a 1,000 home society with a limited space would also would manage its wet waste actually very differently, and there are different products to do that as well. So we divide the communities into 4 categories: small, medium, large, and huge. As you can see the picture on the screen, and of course there's a traditional picture of a big pickup truck that has come to pick up garbage from the society, and you can see lots of plastic bags and lots of mixed waste which is lying right next to it, and people are putting it on the truck. And then what we say is, if your community needs to start composting, there needs to be 5 things that have to be put in place before you can actually begin the process. And this is all from our 15-year experience of getting communities to do it. First one, and the most important one, of course, is segregation at source, which I'm sure you guys might have spoken of in the last webinar too. If you do not segregate, composting should not be started at that moment. You have to get your segregation in place first. Your community needs to give its wet waste out separately from all the other dry waste, reject waste, and electronic waste. And it needs to be kept in separate containers without any sort of plastic bags or any kind of dry waste mixed with it, so that it is ready then to be put into a composter and to be converted into wonderful compost. The second thing, of course, is space for installation. Again, an important consideration, and we've seen, we have communities who've actually done it so visibly and beautifully that you enter the community and there are composters right next to you in the garden, and there are people running around it, and they've accepted it into their daily living. While there are some communities where you do not find that luxury of a garden space or a space around the driveway, then people do it on the terrace, or some people do it in an aerated basement. But that space is necessary, and that space should be well aerated, and it shouldn't be a dark and a dingy basement or a closed room or something like that. There needs to be a good amount of aeration when you're trying to compost your wet waste aerobically. Third thing, of course, is budget allocated. Composting, like any other thing, is a solution, and there are products that are designed specifically for it that will enable a long-term success of the whole process in your community, and will make sure that you compost seamlessly for many, many years without worrying. So there's an initial budget that you have to allocate, and there's also a budget for a recurring cost, because composting is essentially you're converting your food scraps into compost. So you have to add some amount of carbon, which is added in terms of cocoa peat powder and microbes powder. Cocoa peat helps to compost the food waste. It's the source of carbon that allows you to do it, and also absorbs a lot of moisture and make sure there is no smell coming from the process. And the microbes are an accelerator that enable you to fasten the process of composting. Now, those 2 things are necessary because in city setups, say a city like Mumbai, where there's lots of different flats close to each other, you do not want that your composting system smells, and people walking around or visiting the community, or the people who are residents of the community, to smell it and then get discouraged or stop doing it. So hence those 2 consumables are very important. The fourth thing, of course, is the housekeeping allocated. You need people to run this process well, but it's not a very hard process. It's actually, composting is actually a very, very simple process, and it's very natural. Everything composts eventually, but here we are just trying to do it in a controlled environment. If your housekeeping was already collecting food waste from your homes and bringing it down to the central bin or a container, now their job will go one step extra. They will bring that food waste down and they'll put it into your composting units, whatever kind of solution that you may be using in your society. And the fifth one is champions that manage. And that word champions is very, very important for us at daily dump, because we really feel that if a resident has taken the step to get everybody at the community on board with waste management and to think about the environment, and there can't be bigger champions than that. And we feel somebody from the community, it could be the association or somebody who's taken this step to just oversee the process, because although composting is an easy process, we're just adding waste with a couple of powders and it's magically turning into wonderful compost. But if it smells or if something goes bad, then the whole thing, we've seen it comes down to the main team who actually got the community started with composting. And people usually say, oh, this has been a disaster. Why did we even start it? Although it's a very simple problem to solve. And just by changing the amount of powders you're putting, you can easily solve it. So considering these 5 things are taken care of, you can start composting. And then where do we come in? We, of course, design products that help you do it. We have community composting happening in over 300 different communities across the country. And if you consider all our community composting products, there are over 500 different communities that are composting with around 3,000 composters. We give you advice on how to do the segregation collection, help you design a system for collecting different kinds of waste and finally putting your wet waste into the composter. Training for the housekeeping staff. We install the units, and that we are able to do throughout the country now. And we obviously share best practices and examples that we've seen from other places. And talking of best practices, now some advices on the first step. And these are just some miscellaneous advices that we would like to give before we plunge into how composters work. One is, every apartment is different, and every community, so to speak, every society, it's in a different city. They have a different context, different kinds of residents who are staying there, different perspective towards waste and sustainability. So design your own process of collection of waste and segregation of waste. And because your apartment may have your own unique needs. And in the pictures, you might see a lot of young people actually holding banners and going from door to door. We've seen that works really well. And we actually, when we go to communities, we encourage people that if your segregation is a problem, please send the kids to each, we call them the waste police, and they should go to each and every door, knock on the door, and tell people how to segregate. If you want to solve that problem, it really works wonders. And then knowing how others have done it, we need not reinvent the whole wheel when it comes to segregation and collection of waste in our communities. These are some images from our customers where they, collect e-waste separately, which is put into your paper and kept into a separate box centrally in the community. And people can come put their things like mobile phones and other forms of e-waste that go bad into that. And then if you see, there are some steel containers. That's another tip for wet waste. If every house has a steel containers, it's easier to clean the house. Usually we find that people end up using a lot of plastic bags just to hold the wet waste. And when they give it out to the housekeeping, they just give it out the whole bag. And so if you are a 100 home community, you have 100 new plastic bags for wet waste every day, and which comes to more than 3,000 bags every month. So instead of that, if you use steel containers, you can just wash them, easy to rinse, and keep using them. And the wet waste is just transferred to the containers that the housekeeping is carrying. And those containers you can see in this particular slide. You can see that people have developed their own sort of carting mechanisms where they can easily move the waste. They can easily segregate it. There are specified containers. And on the left, you see a lady. She's actually holding the black colored garbage bag and walking down the stairs. That is a big no-no, because if we manage our community's waste collection and handling like that, the system will fail. There will be leakages. People will feel that there's just too much waste around. There's, like Karan mentioned, it will be smelling and things like that. So just pay attention to detail and design your own system. It is what we try to say. And then this particular slide is an example of a pickup routine of a particular community. If you see on the top right, we've mentioned 3 things: daily, weekly, and monthly. Now, in a community, the daily door-to-door collection of waste is recommended. The housekeeping goes to each door with buckets, collects the wet waste only separately. The wet waste and the dry is not collected at the same time. The reject waste is collected in a separate bucket, and the sanitary is collected separately. On a weekly basis, your dry waste can be collected because dry waste is something that doesn't smell. It could be your cardboard boxes, your plastic bottles, or things which you can actually store at home for a longer period of time and just give it out once a week. And monthly, maybe you can have an e-waste collection that can be done. And we've seen in especially bigger cities in the country, there are NGOs working in every city to take out the electronic waste on a monthly basis. And those are the three things, as you can see in the slide, that a daily collection of waste is happening. And finally, the sanitary and the reject waste on a daily basis are the only kinds of waste that are being actually carted out by your particular municipalities. Wet waste is being put into the composters, if you see the top left of the screen. And the weekly collection is happening of dry waste and the monthly of the electronic waste. And then similar things can be done for garden waste also. A lot of our communities actually have a lot of garden waste in terms of dried leaves or cuttings from our gardens and clippings, and even those things can be composted and need not be thrown out. Actually, we see a lot of people burning dried leaves, which is a widespread practice, and especially in Bangalore, we walk around and see a lot of it happening. Please do not do that. Garden waste can also be composted. The only difference is the garden waste takes longer to decompose. It's a very open system. You're not putting it into a product. You're not adding coco peat here because the waste itself has a lot of carbon. You're only adding the microbes and you're adding water on a regular basis. And you're putting it into the leaf composters. And it takes longer, usually at least 6 to 8 months to become garden mulch. And then you can remove it and have wonderful compost as well. So even that is possible. This is just different kinds of composting units that we've done over the years. We used to have a product called the Manthan. Now we have a very popular product called the Aga, as you heard from my nickname before. And then there's Leave It Pots, which is for smaller communities. We've actually also come up with another one called Gobble Max. And very excitingly, there's another community composting product which is on the way, which will be a bigger one than the Aga, and which will be coming soon. We are hoping that by next month we can have it out into the market, fingers crossed. And then on the rightmost side, you can see pulverizers. We at Dairy Dump don't make pulverizers, but then there are these electronic organic waste converters that are used for larger communities, say above 1,000 flats. But those we recommend only for larger, because when you think of hot pile composting or composting by the Dairy Dump method, which I'll be explaining next, the number of agas or the manthans or the leave-it pots you might need will be a lot more. And hence we recommend pulverizers in those cases. But then those are, you have to be very careful when you choose a product there and make sure that that is composting it and actually not burning the waste that you're putting in it. So this is about the do's and don'ts of composting before you actually plunge into the process of actually doing it. What I will do now is regarding the Aga itself, I'll do a small demo right away. I hope you can see the screen, Karan.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is our composting product called the Aga, which we recommend for about 25 to 300, and even apartments up to 400 have actually done it. An important thing to note is this is not an electric product. You can keep it anywhere out in the open, be it a garden, be it the terrace, again, a driveway, some space at the back of the community, near the STP area. I'm just giving out some common places that people keep it in. And as you can see, it says all good things come in pairs, and so does the Aga. It's made out of HDPE material. The height of the composter you can see is about 1 meter, and judging also by the height of the person standing next to it. And the diameter, the largest diameter of the product is also about 1 meter. And there's a reason for that also. When you're composting, a height of at least 1 meter ensures that there's a hot pile that develops. The temperature rises enough so that all your food waste can turn into compost within a stipulated amount of time. And you can see the orange door in the front. There's a similar door at the back, and there's a door on the top to kind of load your waste in. So every pair of agas comes with a kit. On the right, you can see remix powder and microbes. There are two consumables that have been drawn. These are the ones that I was talking about. The remix powder is nothing but coco peat, which provides the carbon and the necessary water absorption to make the process smell-free and faster and ensure that you get good quality compost within 30 to 40 days. And the microbes is just an accelerator that allows you to fasten the process. Because the amount of waste in community composting is larger, we recommend people to put microbes on a daily basis. And then there's a bowl for removal of leachate, which during composting, some amount of leachate is produced because of the moisture inside your waste. And of course, there's gloves and ring for your staff to use. When you start using the composting unit for a community, what you have to do is put some dried leaves at the bottom of the agar. The middle picture that you see is the correct way to put it. The dry leaves at the bottom ensure that no waste sticks to the bottom, and when your leachate actually flows down and settles at the bottom, it can easily be removed from the tap. The next step is to add some coco peat powder on top of the dried leaves and make a small layer of coco peat there. And then you can do your collection of wet waste from the community, which we spoke about in the previous slide also. When you are collecting kitchen waste, the container that you actually collect it in can also have some amount of coco peat. So by the time the waste is collected, it has some coco peat mixed in it. It also helps to clean the bucket easily after the waste is removed from it. And then the housekeeping person goes door to door to collect the kitchen waste from the community. And so you can see the image, the lady is going from different door to door and then bringing the waste down. And now the wet waste is collected in one central bucket, and then you can add some coco peat powder here itself into the bucket so that it homogenizes well. Then you open the top lid of the agar in the image if you see on the right, and then you just pour your waste and the powder inside the unit, and you just spread it out evenly inside. And then you put some coco peat powder, and for what we recommend is that for every 1 volume of wet waste that you're putting into the container, at least half a volume of that of coco peat needs to be added as a layer on top of it, just to ensure no smell and faster composting. And make sure it's well spread on the waste and no part of waste is actually exposed. So when you look at the material inside from top of the agar, you should see that there's a layer of coco peat powder over there. And you can also add 1 spoon of microbes, which is like, again, I mentioned the bacterial culture that helps to fasten the process of composting. Now, as you're doing that every day, you're adding the right amount of waste and the coco peat and the microbes, you'll see that there is some sort of moisture that comes out from the tap in front of the agar. If you see the picture on the left, this moisture is called leachate. This leachate is actually very, very nutritious for the plants. You shouldn't waste it or throw it around. And actually, if you throw it around the area of where the composters are kept, the area can start smelling. So you just collect the leachate, you dilute it with about 10 times water, and then you can just pour it out to the plants and helps it to grow. Don't pour the leachate directly, because if it is not diluted, it could just be too strong for the plant. And these are some examples of places where even people have connected the leachate taps to have one single outlet. You need not do this actually. It's much easier actually to just keep the separate bowls for each tap, and you can dilute the thing. But if the setup in your community is such that it is definitely required to join the taps and keep one single outlet, it can be done as well. And then there's a side door of the agar, like I mentioned in the first picture. This side door is only opened when your final compost is ready. And we call it the harvesting of compost, the process of removing it from the composter. And now talking of timelines, now each pair of these units, and this is a typical community composter, can handle up to about 25 apartments. So if say you have 50 families staying there, then you need double the capacity. So you'll need 4 units. If you have 100 apartments or 100 families staying, you'll need 8 units. So that's on the basis of the number of families or the number of people staying, we actually calculate the number of composters you need. So assuming you have 25 families and 2 agar sitting in your community to begin with, you start off with the first one, put all the waste from those 25 families along with the powders every day, like you showed in the previous slides. You keep layering it and you keep filling it up to the absolute brim till the very top where you see the top door. Then you go on to the second composter, do the same thing over there. And by the time the second is filled, your compost in the first one should be ready. And the total time that we are looking at of filling of Aga 1, if you are putting waste from 25 families, is about 15 to 20 days. That's the average amount that we've seen. And the similar amount of time you take to fill the Aga number 2, which is another 15 to 20 days. And by the time that is done, you come back to the first one and you remove the compost, which is shown in this picture. And when you remove this compost, as this man is saying, you might find that if there was any kind of dry waste or any other forms of waste that was accidentally put into your wet waste itself, that would not have decomposed at all, and it would just be lying here that you can just pluck out and remove. Secondly, if you feel this compost is too wet, then there could be a possibility that the right amount of coco peat might not have been mixed before. So at this stage, you can either dry it out in the sun, or you can just mix more coco peat and just put it out into gunny bags as well. Thirdly, if there are some things you feel are not fully decomposed, if there is a chicken bone, or if there is a corn on a cob, or any kind of, say, seeds and mango seed or something like that, those can be put back into the composter for another cycle, so that by the time they go through another cycle of composting, next time they can be taken out. Actually, interestingly, in Bangalore, what we also run is a compost pickup or a compost buyback thing with our communities here, where we actually pick up the compost that they produce on a monthly basis. We usually don't mind if there are bones or other things in the compost, because all of that is calcium, and it is actually really good for the compost, frankly. And yeah, so this is basically the product, and the whole the design of the product is hot pile composting. There is actually a tower sitting inside the composters that is taking air in from the bottom of the composter and spreading it throughout. So basically, you need like three things for composting for sure. You need your kitchen waste, you need a composter, and you need an aerated place to start doing it. And then you can every day start layering your food waste with your powders and just get wonderful compost at the end of 30 to 40 days. And like I mentioned, if you are a bigger community, say you have 100 apartments, and you need 8 AGA units. So you'll have 4 units and 4 units, so 2 sets like that. And you start off with the 4 units initially. You keep dividing the waste and putting it into those 4 units every day. And by the time those 4 units are filled, which we are talking 15th or 20th day approximately, you then go to the next set of 4. And by the time you're done finishing the next set of 4, you come back to the first set and you remove the compost from all 4 units. Approximately, when a composter like this is completely full, it has about 300 kgs of waste plus powder that has gone into it. But when you actually get the compost out of it, it's only about 100 kilos of compost. So there's a reduction of nearly 60 to 70% in terms of the amount of weight that is lying inside the composter. And that 100 kgs of compost, of course, you can start using it in your gardens, feed it to the plants. They would love it, slurp it up and grow. And a lot of communities around the country we've seen do innovative things. They also donate the compost to the local park, or give it to somebody who has an organic farm, or try to send it out to other farmers in or near their society. So this is how the composting system works.
Amar, if we can take a pause for a few questions,
Sure.
Is that all right?
Yes.
So, I'm going to jump the line and kind of ask a couple of questions that I know that people often sort of ask us.
Right.
So, I saw a few questions where people are saying composting is difficult. And in my experience, saying composting is easy, it's the people who are difficult in some senses when you're getting to the community level, right? So it's not so much the technical aspects of how composting happens and how the process works, as it is in managing the expectations and sort of the attention of people who are trying to get community composting done in their communities. So where in your experience are the biggest challenges, through this entire kind of engagement that you have with them?
Yeah, so Karan, when we look at a process or a solution being sustainable, we want that it should, our whole objective is it should be there for the longest period of time and require minimum level of intervention for it to keep on going seamlessly. And like you mentioned, it is a big challenge of actually convincing the whole community initially that this is a safe thing to do. We even to the day we get doubts like, oh, if I compost in my community, am I going to get sick? Or is it like a health hazard that we're actually bringing it into our community and so much waste is going to lie around? People usually have, there are myths around composting that, oh, are there going to be too many mosquitoes? Is it going to spread dengue and things like that? So that is the first step where we get everybody together and actually break those myths. And that's where I feel the champions, like we mentioned, people who actually gather people there and say, no, this is important. And actually, if you go out into the street, that's where the whole mess is. And that's what's creating health problems in the first place. And this is actually a solution, and a wonderful one at that, and a very easy, fun, and a visible solution that you are, and long. There are people or communities that have been composting with us for more than 10 years now, and it's been working wonderful. So that's the first thing. But also, when you think of long term, we find associations change every year. And even your housekeeping people, there are new ones that keep coming in. So over a period of years, we found that we have to keep going back to our customers and talking to them and saying, please continue. We are there to support you. And sometimes we find that a new association has come up and then they are just reconsidering the whole thing. And they're finding that, oh, let's just start giving the waste out again. And maybe that will be cheaper. But then to convince them again, that's another kind of a challenge that we've seen. But by just being proactive as an organization and speaking to our customers, I think we've been doing fairly well in getting them to continue to compost as well.
So another question which follows up with what you were saying about new people coming into the process, whether it is the people actually handling the waste or the the committees and the associations that are coming in a new year. So eventually, as we've seen it over the last 10 years, and I'm sure you see also, a huge part of the problem that has to be dealt with is social attitudes towards waste and social attitudes towards touching waste, if I can put it that way. uh, so how do these champions, or how can champions like the kind you've described, who to me are just catalysts, if I can use another word in this system, towards adoption within a housing complex, how do they overcome these very strong, or sort of this apathy towards waste and wanting to deal with it? Because the easiest thing to do would seem to be to just get it out of sight, have it vanish, which you can do by paying a contractor to just tow it out, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a balance, Karan. But we've also seen off late, for example, we've seen a lot of policy changes also happen. We've seen that now the municipalities are also much more aware than, for example, I have a 5-year experience in doing this. So from the time that I joined and to today, when we would do demos 5 years ago, we sometimes even had to explain what composting means and that such a thing exists, that everything in the world decomposes and all that. But now actually we start our discussion from people already knowing that this is right there. We've seen that the awareness has grown, which is great for the system, and it has grown because of things like Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. And we can of course always go into the nitty-gritties of how successful the Abhiyan has been or whether it has been or not. But in terms of the awareness, definitely now it is there. We find that even young people now know that composting as a thing does exist. So it has actually become easier for us to sell over the last half a decade that I have seen it evolve. And as far as the champions are concerned, some people are really motivated. We actually did a customer analysis initially where we found out that even though there's been policy changes and people are still being told that you have to do waste management, otherwise you won't get a license or for your building and stuff like that. We found that 70% of our community composter customers last year actually just did it for environmental reasons. So it's a lot of motivation amongst our champions to get their community to manage waste better, and they usually do it through lots of and some people create lots of stringent rules in their community saying if somebody does not segregate waste we'll charge this much fine. While others do it through slightly less harsher methods, and they do lots of meetings and weekend groups and talks, but it's I must say it's a thankless job, and we're so lucky to have actually met so many wonderful people. They just keep doing it, and at the end of the day, they're just getting their community to compost, and it's wonderful to see. And the last thing that I would also like to mention is, because we've engaged with so many housekeeping staff over the years, the housekeeping staff usually knows a lot more about composting than the residents. And because we've seen, say in Bangalore, most of the people we've seen housekeeping staff are either people who hail from villages in and around Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, or people who have come from the Northeast who are working as housekeeping in some apartments. Some of them know the ins and outs of compost and how wonderful that material actually is because of their background. And actually, so the point of actually touching the waste and doing composting by the staff, it's not been that big a challenge as much as it looks on paper, I think.
Interesting. So I'll just ask Yogita or perhaps Poonam, if there are any questions that they would like to mention that have come in. Yogita, has any question come in that you would like to put up?
Actually, somebody mentioned, T.S. Venugopalan mentioned that it was an experience that she was sharing, I think, saying that that basically the starting point is important, because if you get it wrong at the beginning, then it puts people off and then they are reluctant to try again. So I think the 5 things that Amar laid out at the beginning that you need in place before you start, I think people jump the gun. They are excited perhaps or enthusiastic to get going. So I think their experience has been that they got off on the wrong foot, and then everybody just backs off and says, hey, this has gone wrong, we're not doing this, it's smelling, it's not working. So other than those 5 things, is there anything else you could go up and say to a community that, look, you need to get this stuff in place before you get going, so that you start out on the right note?
Yeah, so apart from those 5 things, I wouldn't think there is anything else actually. It's I mean, if you're done with your segregation, you have a space, you have the people, and after that it's just left to attitude, I think. If you and of course the most important thing is the willingness to invest in a system or invest in a solution, and to think beyond just how the system works, and to be able to see the bigger benefits of going for a solution. I think that's what I would urge people to see, and say that if our society is composting, it's not only that they're preventing this much waste, they're preventing so much carbon actually from going out. They're actually having an environmental impact which actually goes in tons of waste if you look at it from an yearly perspective. And if you look at things that way, and you look at the whole longevity of it, and say, if we do this for 10 years, we're actually going to save so much from going into the landfills. I think that would be a nice way to look at things, as far as and it's all perspective. We've also done composting in communities where it fails, and then literally everything that happens wrong in the community is blamed on composting. That also happens. Some cloud would have burst from the sky, and probably it's the composter. So and just that's far-fetched, but it's so that's all comes down to perspective and getting everybody on board. And but it's definitely improving, and we've seen that it's the awareness and the willingness is increasing, but it needs to be a lot more. You can always look at things from both sides, I guess.
I have another question. It's not from somebody, but in our experience, we found that there are a number of canteens, institutions, or restaurants, especially here in Goa, that there is a level of awareness, and they seem to be keen to take on composting because they're generating so much waste. It's also a stipulation now from governments that if you have a restaurant of a certain size, you cannot indiscriminately dump out into the regular municipal system. So would you suggest something like an AGA for them as well, given that space may be a constraint? Or how should some of these people tackle it, say a restaurant or a canteen?
So restaurants or canteens, if it's manageable amounts of waste, we have another product called the Gobble Max. I'll just put it out on screen as well. But then there are restaurants where the amount of waste is a lot. you're talking 100 to 200 kilos, but the amount of space is very little. Over there, probably giving it to another business which actually picks it up and takes it to a central place to compost. Or we've seen a lot of restaurants and resorts actually giving it to piggeries, which has been, and somebody in Bangalore was actually recently telling me that piggeries actually is like a blessing to the city of Bangalore, because so much wet waste overnight is just taken out by people who run pig farms, and is taken out of the city, which if they were not, nobody knows what they would do with that much wet waste. But if it's manageable waste, say within about 50 kilos per day, that we're talking cafes and restaurants where there's limited capacity seating and only a lesser number of tables, then the Gobble Max works. And I'll just quickly take out a photo and probably show it to everybody.
Okay.
Amar, there's also another question from Neha. She says that should a community with a lane setting and not an apartment setting, how should they work through the challenge of space? And the other is also, what are some of the points that one can use to convince the community regarding investment when they have been having easy with the garbage vans, no hassle, no effort, and the garbage is already dealt with?
Okay.
And the other thing is, can we reuse the compost instead of cocoa peat? And other than composting, being partner really worried about biomedical waste from household going into landfill? So those are the questions.
Sure. So the first thing, are you guys able to see the Gobble Max flyer?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the product, Yogita, that I was mentioning. So it's been, and as you can see, it is designed in the form of the bins that are there in most of the cafes and restaurants that you see. But inside, the whole thing has been changed, and there's a stainless steel frame inside that enables it to be in different sections, and the lower section composts. So you keep adding 5 kilos of waste into each Gobble Max every day, along with the same cocoa peat and microbes. And it fills up, if you're adding 5 kilos, it fills up in about 22 to 25 days. And by the time the bottommost part, you can see a door in the front, you can open it and remove the compost. So this is another product actually that we made that can help out people, and you can maybe try to see if people would want to adopt something like this over there. And and we also have a YouTube channel, by the way, for everyone to see videos on all these products that I've been sharing, and all this information is there on our website, dailydump.org. And coming to the questions, Poonam, that you mentioned.
Amar, the questions are there in the Q&A. So you can directly look at them and answer one by one.
Sure. So the first one from Neha is, how should a community with a lane setting and not an apartment setting should work through the challenge of space? So by lane setting, I actually understand two kinds of communities. There are communities with gated communities with lanes. Over there, actually, the challenge of space is not there. You have enough space to put out community composting units, and you can actually do it lane-wise. And it's popularly in Bangalore actually also called lane composting, where people are trying that each lane with a set of say 10 to 20 houses will have their own composters sitting at the end of the lane, or sitting at a local park inside that community. But if you're not a gated community, you are an open housing layout like we find in most, like even in say small town India, we find just open houses and big communities where there's no gating system or anything. There also the lane concept could work, where you just need a common space which has been decided by the local association, and you can keep putting your composters. The magic word again is decentralization. The more you decentralize the solution, the better the implementation will be. You need to make sure that the waste being carted around the community is not carted too much. And if it's a well laid out housing community, you don't want people to still carry waste over long distances. You can have composters close to each area. How can we reuse the compost instead of cocoa peat is another question. So it can be reused. The compost itself has a lot of carbon content to put back as additive. And we find that we have some customers who, after doing composting for about 5 to 6 months, become experts at it, those apartments. And what they do is they mix their cocoa peat that they've been taking from us. They take 50% cocoa peat by volume, and the remaining volume they add as 50% compost. But the compost, of course, that you're adding should be already of good quality, dried, and should not be a very moist, smelly compost. What I'm trying to say is that you need to get the process right first, get the good quality compost, and then you can start reusing it in the 50% with your coco peat at best. Don't use only compost, because coco peat absorbs water, and that is kind of priceless, because that ensures there is no moisture. There's no smell when you're using the product. And then the next question is, other than composting being partner, really worried about biomedical waste from house and going in landfill? How your city is handling that? Okay. So in Bangalore, we have actually, we have registered organizations. There's one called Maridi Eco, for example, who have been given permission by the municipality to pick up biomedical waste. And to know about such organizations, you can, in your local cities, you can actually reach out to some hospital, and most hospitals are in touch with the registered vendors for picking up the biomedical waste in respective cities. And you can find out your local vendor, and they'll be able to come and pick it up on a weekly or a bi-weekly sort of basis. And then the last question is, we run a yoga center and guest house and have built our own leaf composters in the garden, 4 by 4 meters and 1.5 meters high. We have been adding our own food waste mixed with EM. Is this acceptable? Should we add coco peat or sawdust to the food bucket too and mix? We want to try out cost by investing in buying a new composter in this COVID time. Okay, yeah. Again, COVID times, I think that's always the elephant in the room these days. So these are hard times. So yeah, you can have your own leaf composting unit. For leaf composting, you do not need to add coco peat or sawdust. Just your leaf composters and adding a bacterial culture and water is enough. But if you're doing wet waste composting, then you need things like coco peat or sawdust and do it. So what you're doing right now, on the screen it looks fine, but please do share us pictures by WhatsApp. We have a WhatsApp helpline number, which is 9916426661. I'll also write it on the chat window, and we can take a closer look at what you've built and suggest you changes that you might want to make.
So, speaking about elephants in the room, Amar, I think one of the things that tends to happen with a lot of communities is that they need to basically they need to consider whether they are going to use an electronic composting system. Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think I had a lot of background noise. So what we need, what compost, societies can do is choose between whether they have if I can call it a non-electronic composting system like the AGA, for instance, or whether they consider one of these more intensive powered or kind of electronic composting systems like you had mentioned, right? Especially when they are really large societies, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, I have not used personally a mechanical composter that is, using different types of, and when I say mechanical, I mean an electronic composter, of course. But my sense of it is that there are certain challenges, primarily in terms of things getting stuck, for example, bones or jamming the mechanism, and then, them being a little difficult to sort of resolve or solve, repair in some senses. And the other thing for the bigger composting systems where I've seen them used, obviously it's the energy consumption, and in my way of thinking about waste, the quality of the compost that actually comes out of them. So do you have some thoughts on that, and how societies can make better sort of decisions about this?
I'd like to add something on that, Karan.
Yes.
What we must realize is at a slightly more broader level, we are undercapitalized on the waste space as a country, right? As a nation, we have not invested enough money. And I'm not only, what I mean by money is we have not built infrastructure, we have not built capacity, we have not built an ecosystem. So what happens is the small players who are taking the biggest risks. What is an organization like Daily Dump doing? We are trying to monetize an externality that is produced by society. Society has not taken the cost of throwing waste out, and it's not put it into their capital books, right, of accounts. So we have gone to the externality and we are saying we will monetize it. Small players with less capital are always going to have a problem because the price point and the market readiness is not there, right? So the market will say, I want it at the lowest cost. Okay, when you try and put it at the lowest cost, so to speak, then what happens is you have to do some cost, you have to trade off on how much you're willing to, the customer also trades off on how much they're willing to pay for service. So while mechanically and technically we can send a rocket to the moon, and we can actually solve a composting product, say it's a machine also, if it parts break, we have the capacity to repair it. But that's not the point. We technically it's possible, but we don't have the attitude to say we're going to invest in that repair. We're going to pay a fair wage to the man who comes to repair it. We are going to pay a fair wage for the service. Whereas if I get a big CNC laser machine for my shop floor, I'm paying good dollars to get the Japanese to come and service it. So at a fundamental level, the whole ecosystem is not, it's undercapitalized. And therefore, when people ask us, is a machine better? A machine might be better, but are you prepared to pay for downtime? Are you prepared for paying for real costs of that and the power and a fair wage to the person who will come? Because the person who wants to come has to fix it, right? So, so those are the decisions. So coming back to your question, how do you make that decision? If you make it from the corporate lens of, I'm going to make an Excel sheet and I'm going to figure it out, and if a computer network system works in my office, then why can't this work in the same way? But you're comparing the wrong things. It's not an orange and banana comparison. You must understand that. And this is the very fundamental problem we have when we go to communities. And very often you're dealing with, especially in a city like Bangalore, you're dealing with people who are very well educated. They have very high, well-paying jobs in corporate. Their experiences are coming from corporate thing. And but they don't, because they're residents, they are not really facility managers. Yeah, so it's like a disconnect. So they don't apply what they've learned there and try and understand this industry. But Amar, you can add your perspective. This has always irked me, and I wanted to say, I have to, say it.
No, definitely the similar things to what Poonam said. So this whole market and the industry is at a very interesting stage. We've also seen over the last 4-5 years that the number of solutions that, if you Google just community composting, the number of solutions that are available have increased a lot. And in fact, there's been a lot of backlash from consumers and also by resident welfare associations, because there were many machines that were made that would actually burn the waste and not really compost it or kind of pulverize it. And so there was this whole drama that happened, and there were news articles and all that. So what I would say is, I would urge the people who are here that when you are choosing a composting product, please at least speak to 3 or 4 testimonials, or speak to the customers of the vendor that you are speaking to of different sites, and ask them how their experience has been and if they face any difficulties. And always choose proven products, because this market of composting is right now at a stage where a lot of people are trying different prototypes, and that always is an ongoing thing, right? Many years down the line, that would lead out to maybe, say, a very different looking product, and maybe we'll have things that make waste actually disappear in 20 years time. But till that time comes, please choose wisely and see something that has worked for a longer period of time, and not just choose it on the basis of, oh, this is the capital cost for this is the capital cost for this one looks like a button, if I press it something happens, so I'll go for that. That just shouldn't be the only thing that gets you to a decision. You should look at how good the compost is, whether it is usable. Is your housekeeping staff happy using that particular thing that you're investing in? and speak to that guy. I mean, show him that one thing is going to be sitting here and you have to do these 5 things. Because even in the machines, you have to take out the final thing that comes out, the pulverized material, and actually store it in different crates for about 20-30 days to compost it. But overall, as an industry, we've reached a stage where we have both kinds of solutions. I mean, Daily Dump can't cater to a 700 apartment block. They have to go for the machines and just try to see which one has been proven better in the market, is what I'm saying.
No, so at the risk of completely derailing what you were planning to go on to, one last question, Amar, if I may. What Poonam talked about in terms of, waste management being undercapitalized. What you are mentioning about, how people compensate, for instance, the people who work with waste, right? So I feel this comes back to certain social issues we have, because obviously, if you consider that a lot of those clients or residents are, very well established in the world of business, they're successful in that area, you would think they would be able to apply those same set of rules to the situation. It's very clear they don't. And to my mind, that is because of the social attitudes towards waste itself, right? So the first thing is that I think fundamentally we don't see waste as our problem. We say waste as somebody else's problem. One being the government, two being the maybe facility staff or the resident welfare association, three being the people who manage our waste in the waste system, the informal sector. All of us know how difficult that is in terms of how poorly they are compensated and how much risk they actually exposed to. So I think it comes back to just being that I don't think waste is my problem. I think that until I feel it is my problem, I will not put value on the service that helps me kind of handle it, right? And I wonder if there are ways in which you are addressing that, or that you've seen other people be successful in addressing just that mindset in a broader sense. I know you mentioned that a lot of this has changed in the last 5 years, of course, since you've begun, but it seems like we still have a lot of work to do.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of work to do. We are talking of when we say in Daily Dump, we have about 500 communities and we have some 60,000 odd people composting. It looks like a lot of thousands, but we are living in a country with billions, and there's the market is really big, and there's just a lot of waste piling up every day. There's in Bangalore, say there's 5,000 tons of waste produced on a daily basis, which I don't know how much the number has changed during the COVID scenario. But yes, it definitely comes back to the same thing of attitude. Like you mentioned, it being a social issue. If today we walk out of our Daily Dump office and just go down 200 meters down the lane to a main road and just randomly stop a few people and ask them how they manage waste and do they know Daily Dump or how do they look at it, people have no idea. They usually say, I don't know where my waste really goes. And when I ask my friends also, I usually get similar answers. So it is a big, massive problem that needs to be solved. And where we position ourselves is, now we are a design-led company where we feel designing products have an impact over a long term, and people use products that enable them to see things differently. When people engage with a company like us, they see a lot of knowledge, or they see a lot of material being given to them that actually makes them think about things from different perspectives. We feel that has a big impact, and over a period of years, it leads to mindset change. It also comes down to education. And in Daily Dump, we've done work on, say, curriculums, and we've built the first learning an experience center, the one of its kind experience center for waste and sustainability in Bangalore, where people can come and actually see very visibly and engage with certain panels and understand more about the ecosystem. And similarly, a lot of those things need to change. Like when we grew up, nobody in school actually told me about composting, and I actually got to know about it well into my 20s, which is amazing. I actually knew a lot about Pythagoras theorem in school, and it is a joke that another day has gone by and I've not used Pythagoras theorem in my life. And so there's those issues as well. And there are plenty of other people also kind of trying to address the social issues. And I should mention there's people like, say, Hasiru Dala. There's an organization that primarily works with your waste pickers and tries to get them to become local entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, the challenge is to get people to look at waste pickers and people who work in this space as experts. Because, and actually, a waste picker and a recycler or a kabadi wala is an expert on materials. He knows what is the worth of a cardboard, what is the worth of a plastic, and what are the different kinds of plastic, where are they going to go after it, how much is one thing going to be worth when it actually goes to the industry. There's just a lot of knowledge that those guys contain, but it's just that we don't look at it that way. So I would say education, and I would also urge people to look at initiatives that are actually already working in different cities, trying to address that issue. And but it is a mountain to climb, yes.
Yeah.
Amar, I have another question for you.
Yeah.
SB asks that can cow dung manure replace cocoa peat? And also, can cardboard and paper and dry brown leaves be used as a source of carbon at the community level?
Yes, yes for both. Just that when we talk of community composting, we speak big cities where lots of people are staying close by. So if your community is up for using cardboard, paper, and cow dung, because what will happen is if you're using, say, shredded paper or cow dung or say sawdust for your this thing, it might not absorb the moisture as well, and there could be some sort of smell, and you might have to mix the whole pile very very frequently and manage the moisture inside it and manage the taking out the leachate and removal. But if you live in a very if you live in a space where people are up for doing it and it's a big enough space and you have your composting happening where it's not a hassle to anyone, please go ahead and do it. But if you are in an apartment complex in a city where people are going might question the output and you might want to do the easier thing and just stick to cocoa peat and microbes.
Yeah, I think it also kind of brings home to me that quite often we ignore the skill component in this, and which is that when you start out composting, most of us stumble, even if it's for a single household using, say, a kamba or whatever it is, right? So I think there is a learning curve that helps you take on more complicated waste and sort of do it in a more resourceful way with materials that you may have available. But this means developing skill of getting familiar with the tools, of understanding the, if I can, the biological or the physics of the composting systems, and then you are able to step in, adjust for climate, adjust for different types of waste, and adjust for more limited space, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
Amog, if I can just ask you to run a couple more polls, and then maybe Amar can get back into his flow, which we've so rudely interrupted. Poonam, I mean, another area, Poonam, Amar, that we can get to after these polls get over. See, I think one of the most challenging things I still come back to is how do you convince your society, and how do you convince the individuals within your society? Not all of us are charismatic, well informed, excellent communicators, and yet there are many people, I'm sure, who are extremely convinced of the importance of composting. Um, there is a new poll that Amog has put up. Please, also respond to that. So perhaps you can just give some thought once the polls are over to whether you feel there's anything you can add as advice to those people. tricks that you've seen work, perhaps. Okay, we'll end the poll now. Poonam, Amar, perhaps.
Yeah. So, what apart from the things already mentioned, Karan, I think just keeping at it. We've seen some of our customers, amazingly being really patient with their societies. They use WhatsApp groups these days really well. We've seen the whole world's been quite WhatsApped, and every community has this group of association as well as everybody which is on them. And usually, gated communities nowadays they have these apps also that everybody's on. I think sharing best practices over there, especially for segregation of waste, repeatedly so that it's on everybody's face. And those apps also allow associations actually to kind of scrutinize who's not really managing waste well in the society and kind of penalizing people as well if people want to go that route. Those are the things that we've seen also work. And then, like I mentioned before, using or enabling the children in the society to be change makers and going from door to door and running this whole campaign is another thing that we've seen work. Then on important dates, like, there are gatherings that happen around Independence and Republic. And when I say gatherings, I don't know how much of it is going to happen now that there's social distancing. Let's see how the Independence Day this time goes. But usually we see that in those times people engage with each other a lot. So getting to get everyone together and talking about the importance of doing this, and it's basically like any other thing that you do. Convincing is hard. It will require repeated effort and being in the face of people and not being afraid, basically.
I'm beginning to think that perhaps we should hand over all the other stuff to the kids also, since they seem to do a better job with us in this regard. But great. So, Amar, is there some other stuff that we stopped you short from that you'd like to share, or?
Not really. I mean, this is
Okay,
about
I
it.
have a question. There
Yeah.
is a question from Shalki Mishra, and she's asking that instead of putting the waste in a container, how about we dig and drop the wet waste underground, especially in communities that have open garden space? What are some of the common challenges in doing this?
So that's a typical form of pit composting. Some of the challenges of doing that, of course, are maintenance. When you have a pit that is dug into the ground and you're putting wet waste into it every day and putting more browns and carbon in it, maintaining it and turning the pile every day, because the amount of oxygen that actually goes into the pile will be less. So you don't want that it becomes an anaerobic process without oxygen, and then in that case it starts smelling. So if it is not maintained and it requires hard work, it will start smelling, and that can also lead to rodent problems in and around the area where you are doing the pit composting method. Which again, I think the question before, if you feel you have lots of land and you can do it safely at some space which is at a very convenient distance from people's homes, you can do a pit composting. But if you again live in a tighter knit society, I would recommend not to. And anyway, when we talk of metro cities, I don't think pit composting is a luxury that people can afford over
Also,
there.
the pit, even if you want to do pit composting, like Amar says, if you do it in a slightly rural setting, it's fine. But please make sure that you make 3 pits. You will get rats.
Yeah.
If you're putting food, be prepared for that. But make 3 pits. You fill 1 pit, then you fill the next pit, and then you fill the third pit. By the time the third pit is filled, this one will be ready. You can't do it with only 1 pit.
Okay.
I think also, as you said, in limited spaces, urban settings, the danger of somebody, getting into that pit unintentionally, especially kids or animals, I think that creates a new set of challenges itself. So a little about perhaps how you can go about deploying composters in other cities. Like I know that you're based out of Bangalore, and I know that the agas are, for example, available across the country. But perhaps you can explain how it works in terms of a apartment complex that would like to adopt it in, say, Delhi, just as an example.
As a business model, Daily Dump has presence across 17 cities across the country. And we have outlets in different cities. For example, Delhi, you mentioned we have more than 8 outlets that are working in different parts of Delhi. And by outlets, we mean those are representatives who stock our home composting products in those cities. And they also get the communities there to start composting with the agas. And so in these select cities, we also have a capability of actually doing the installations ourselves and getting people trained and also doing visits later on to check whether the composting system is working well. If you order composters from, say, Daily Dump, we actually send it from Bangalore to your city, but we'll get our nearest partner to come to you, install the units, speak to you, and also, if possible, or if that is what we decide on initially, also do visits to check on if it is going well and send out reports to you on the process as well. So that way you can check our website or reach out to us in that WhatsApp number that I had mentioned before, and we will be able to give you the nearest partner that is there closest to your city that you can speak to and engage with. But as like you mentioned, Karan, as far as delivery is concerned, it's possible throughout the country. We have, I think, communities from Shillong to Delhi to Calicut to Mumbai doing composting right now. So it's pretty much spread out.
So I think we have Tanvi who's raising a hand. Perhaps we can try and understand what her question is. Amog, is there a way for us to enable her to speak? I'm not sure we can. Tanvi will try and answer your question at a later point in time. Uh, any other questions? Oh, right. Yeah. So any other questions, Poonam, that you
No,
would like to address?
no, I think that's good.
Yogita, any other questions?
I think that covers most of what we've got, even from the YouTube questions.
Okay, excellent. So thanks so much, Amar. I think a great sense of how composting works in communities, especially with the Aga. I think also interesting, perhaps, to hear a little bit about your upcoming composter. But the Gobble Max also, I think, is very interesting in that context as a sort of a smaller scale, more compact solution. Um, Poonam, thank you so much for being here. Everybody else from the Daily Dump team, thanks so much for helping with the question and answers. As usual, Amog, Zainab, the Hasgeek team, thank you for getting us working with streaming in all directions and running this whole thing for us. It's made for an interesting conversation. One last poll which Amog has reminded me we need to cover. So we are just trying to understand what you feel is the biggest benefit of composting from your perspective as an individual. Is it because you need compost for gardening, whether you'd like to contribute to keeping the city clean, or so on? I'll just take about 30 seconds for you to answer this before we end the session. Okay. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. Um, I would say that, you know, community composting is an incredibly difficult thing. It's difficult, I think, because to convince people to do something that they feel isn't their responsibility, or that they feel they don't have control over, is not an easy thing to do. Um, at the same time, as Poonam from Daily Dump, Amar have been kind of highlighting, this problem is not going to solve itself. While I agree with Poonam saying that, in a sense, waste management is undercapitalized, but in another sense, we know that with large scale 100 crore, 115 crore incinerators, we have considerable amounts of money being spent in perhaps the wrong direction. By this, I mean that instead of looking for individually managed or collectively managed decentralized solution, we keep putting all our eggs in one basket and watching those systems fail. So if you can actually get your community to compost, or if you can get started and help them continue composting, I think you're doing a great service not only to your community, contributing not only to your life, but also, helping our cities begin to be something like we would like them to be. We complain about poor quality of life in our cities, and to my mind, a lot of it is really around waste. We see construction waste around the place, which is an eyesore. We'll happily go out on a European vacation and we won't see any of that and think everything looks charming and beautiful. We will walk down our streets and have the smell of garbage and deal with it on an everyday. And we will, then consider it an imposition if, like European cities, say for example the city of London, they make composting at home mandatory. So I think we have to make these choices in a more practical way. We have to make them in a more thoughtful way, and we have to take ownership of some of these choices, either directly through our own actions or through our influence on our government agencies and perhaps the people who make decisions for them. So I hope you have found this an interesting session. I think we've been able to discuss several things that come to the heart of what the real problem is, whether it's social, whether it's in the terms of the tools, whether it's in terms of the persistence required. I hope this has been productive for you, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to come back to us. You can go to the hasgeek.com page through which you probably came to know about this session and add your question in as comments. A lot of the questions have also been shared with you. Sorry, I have been responded to either via Zoom, where we are connected right now, or via YouTube. In case you would like, there is also the composting helpline, which Amar shared the number for. So you can call that number and get advice from Daily Dump about the particular situation that you face. Thank you all again for joining us today and for spending your evening with us. And I'll like to bring this session to an end.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
Thank you.
Poonam.
Thank
Have
you
a
guys.
good
Thank you.
weekend.
Bye.